this computer. Okay, awesome. Yes, our topic for today is systems and processes, and it can be a bit of a boring topic. This workshop's going to basically end up as a to-do list. So it's, depending what stage you're at, will determine which of these you need to do right now, which of these can be on the back burner for later. But it's really good to be aware of these concepts, whatever stage you're at. So even if you're just starting your venture, and I'll go into why that is. I'm just going to share the screen now.
Am I right? Are we far enough not to need mics?
Yes. Yeah, we're good.
Cool.
Yep.
So we'll kick off. So systems and processes, what we mean by this are all the ways that we can automate and streamline the operation of our business. And I'll spend a little bit of time explaining why this is important and what we mean by it. But the key thing from this workshop, as I was just saying before, is it really is a to-do list of action items. So there's a lot of things you need to go away and do. What we might do for this workshop is provide the list, and then you'll end up with your task to go and actually implement it all afterwards. But please, like normal, just interrupt any time if you have any questions, or if you want to challenge anything or contribute from your own experience base, that's awesome as well. I think let's start with why. Why do we need systems and processes? It starts with one reason, which is when we're starting a business, we're the crazy idiot that has to do everything. And it can feel like this photo where we're juggling, not just juggling lots of balls and trying to keep them in the air, but they're on fire and they hurt when we catch them. So the challenge with that is when we go to bring other staff members in, and we're so used to keeping everything together with duct tape and cable ties, that it's really hard for someone else to come in and know what needs to be done. And it's also really hard for someone else to come in, particularly if they're not a co-founder, if they don't have equity in the business. It's really hard for them to come in and actually care enough that they're going to hurt themselves, like catching the fireballs, in the way that you do. So it can actually cause friction in your team as well. The other part of this, though, is that in order to scale, we actually need to have systems and processes. And you may not have heard of Paul Graham, but he's one of the investors behind Y Combinator, which is arguably the leading accelerator program in the world, which means it's a company that invests in startups and helps them grow and scale. And he's got this great quote, which is very true, which is when you're starting, you should be doing things that don't scale. So when you're first starting out, don't be creating systems and processes and don't be worried about scaling, which sounds sort of counterintuitive to what I was just saying about the need to have systems and processes. But what he's talking about here is in the very early days, it's all about customer discovery, customer validation, confirming the problem is actually there, confirming people want your solution, confirming people will actually pay for it. And then you're in search for a business model. And until you actually work out what your business model is, there's no point actually building to scale. So what that means is the first version of your product doesn't need to be able to take 1 million users. It just needs to be able to handle like the 5 customers that you're going to put on it. Your systems and processes don't need to be scalable. At the start, it's just you running around like a mouse in the hamster wheel or a hamster in the hamster wheel. And you don't need to scale. But at some point, once you work out your business model, then you do actually need to start focusing on, okay, how do we scale? And for entrepreneurs, the hardest part of scaling is actually themselves. It's actually their own time. And what happens is we often go into businesses, say you're passionate about photography and you start a photography business. And the problem is the more you grow that business, the less and less time you actually spend doing photography, and the more time you spend doing bookkeeping, accounts, hiring staff, managing jobs, taking bookings, supporting customers, and all the rest of it. So it's really important that we create systems if we want to scale. And the point at which we do that is once we've found our business model. So if we look at it just on this diagram, another way of saying the same thing is most of us, the stage that we're at is way back in discovery and validation. So discovery is where we're identifying the problem, confirming it exists, making sure our solution solves it and that people want to pay for it. Validation, it moves into validation. So when we start talking about people wanting to pay for it, that's where we talk about product market fit. So this is where we have to confirm who our customer is, confirm their propensity to pay, confirm that our price point is correct, confirm that we can actually make profit from that. And only after those two phases, discovery and validation, do we actually then start looking at systems and processes. The first focus is around efficiency. So how do we have systems and processes to make it all more efficient? Because many of you would feel the frustration of being called upon to do a billion things. You don't have enough funding for a team, so you're under-resourced. You're struggling for capital. You're struggling for the right systems, as in infrastructure systems. You probably can't afford the top-end software or the top-end manufacturing plant or equipment. So in that phase, we're talking about efficiency. And this is where systems and processes and automation can really help. And then after the efficiency phase, we move into the scale phase. And that's where we're really looking at maximizing growth. So how do we actually scale to get more customers on board at a faster rate with less effort? Does that all make sense so far? Yep. Cool. And the other thing about systems and processes, often we dismiss them and we sort of deprioritize them. And the point of this slide is just to remind you that even a commercial pilot, so imagine a pilot at Virgin who flies the one aircraft type every single day, does 6 or 7 flights a day, like takeoff and landing a day. They still have a checklist procedure for everything that they do. So they have a procedure for every takeoff, every landing, in midair, everything they're doing has a checklist. And so beyond just efficiency and beyond just scaling, the other reason we have checklists is so that we don't miss things. So in other words, it's quality control. And so quality control can come back to safety, depending on what you're doing, what environment you're in, what context you work in. But particularly those of you with mining customers, this is really critical. But even if you're manufacturing any sort of product, like having a checklist for quality control is really important. And the other way that this is really important is to protect yourself legally. So if you can point to a piece of paper afterwards that says, we followed this procedure, say it's a workplace health and safety incident. We followed this procedure, we have procedures in place. You're protecting yourself from any legal liability, or at least you're minimizing the risk. So these are all the reasons why systems, procedures, processes are really important. Now, so what I'm going to talk about now is how do we do all this? And first of all, we need to switch our thinking. So we need to, in the very early days of business, it's all about, the customer. The customer, the customer, the customer, the customer, the customer. Eventually, you start looking at your product or service. But then at some point, as you hit that efficiency and scale period, you need to actually switch your focus into systems thinking. You need to be thinking about systems. And I'm using systems there generically to speak about systems for people, as in how do we systemize behavior. Systems as in physical systems, whether they're software or machinery or infrastructure or property or plant, but then also processes. So when we think of those things, the words we should be thinking of are culture. So how do we define culture? Because culture defines behavior, which is a system of how our human capital shows up. We need to think about incentives for human behavior. We need to think about procedures, and we need to think about automation. And they're the areas that I'll be focused on in terms of action items. Cool. So a general principle, if you were to take 3 things away from today, like just 3 things, the first would be that every time you do something, document it as a procedure. So every time you do something in the business, you onboard a new sponsor, you onboard a new member, you reconcile your accounts, you do your BAS, a customer leaves pissed off and doesn't want to come back, and you reach out to them for feedback. Anytime you do anything, document it as a procedure. Now, what do we mean by a procedure? We just mean a simple list. That's all a procedure starts out as. Very basic. Don't make it complicated. Some tools that I recommend. You can use something like Asana or Trello. So you can actually create a template in Asana and Trello where you have a to-do list. So for example, my co-founder and we have templates for certain events that we run in the ecosystem. So that's just become like our playbook of anytime we have an event, we have a Google Sheet template and it's got our procedure in there for the event. Another really cool tool, if you have staff or other people completing things, is something like Typeform. So this is where you actually get someone else to complete the checklist, and then you have a historical log of it being completed. And that part is quite powerful. So Asana and Trello, or even a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, is good if you just want a list. But if you actually want to keep like a checklist of completed procedures for auditing or accountability later, something like Typeform is good, because an employee can just open it on their phone, click, 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 click. They've done all the action. They sign off on it and it's done. Safety Culture has checklists like that as well. So local Townsville-based startup. But the point here, every time you do anything, create a procedure, and then each time you do it again in the future, keep refining that procedure. Just make it that little bit better. The beauty of this is when you do this and then you do have a team, they come in and you've already got procedures for everything. It's already all documented, and also it makes it easier and faster the next time you go to do it. The second thing, if you're going to take away anything from today, so the top three, the second one is automate anything that you do repetitively. So anything that you have to do multiple times over, think about how you can automate that. So some very simple examples. Imagine every day you walk into your office, you have to turn on the aircon, turn on the music, turn on the lights, turn on the photocopier, or whatever. You could actually automate all of that with something like a smart lighting system and a Google Home. Now, that's probably not the greatest example, but it makes it really obvious when you think of it that way, is how do we automate the things we do every single day or we do repetitively over and over. So other than physically automating something, you should look at tools like the Google Home devices. You can look at Amazon Alexa. You can look at things like Siri. All of them have ways that you can actually have automation, not just of physical things, but also of different data. So you can also integrate tools like Zapier. So Zapier allows you to connect pretty much any software in the world to any other software in the world, or any website in the world to any other website. So for example, with Zapier, you could have at any time someone emails you with a certain subject, it automatically adds them to a particular database, and it automatically sends them a certain file, and it automatically sends an SMS to a particular person. You can actually pretty much create an MVP for a product just using Zapier, to be honest. You can even have it where it's automated, that when Zapier can link different systems. So when someone places an order here, it automatically sends the job to the freelancer for them to do. It automatically sends the job to the bookkeeper for them to invoice. So you can start building out all of these sort of automations. But anything that you have to do repetitively, the goal is automate it. Automate it, automate it, automate it. And then the third key takeaway for the day is to outsource or delegate anything that isn't your core business. So be really clear on what is it you're in the business of doing. Don't delegate the core things in your business. So those of you that tuned into the last session on how to wow your customer, we were talking about Tony Hsieh's thesis of delivering happiness. So his book on delivering happiness. And one of the things he talks about in there is never outsource your core business. So if you were running a restaurant, you wouldn't outsource your kitchen. But it's perfectly fine to outsource the other things that aren't your core business. So outsource the cleaning, outsource your financial management, outsource all the other aspects that aren't your core business. That's perfectly fine. Now, what do we mean by outsource or delegate? So some good tools here are things like Airtasker, Freelancer. There's also sites like Fiverr for small jobs. You can also use agencies, so social media agencies, marketing agencies, design agencies. I've got here professionals as well, so accountants, lawyers, insurance brokers, but also you can get contractors, staff, and interns. So for interns, have a look at the universities. Every university has some sort of industry placement program where you can actually apply for a project work that you want students to complete. So I've used this to develop software products before, or to update certain parts of our software products. I know startups that use interns, for example, at a QUT for their marketing. Obviously, they're interns, so they're not typically amazingly great, and there's a lot of time involved in managing them. but you start building a capability, and often you go on and hire those interns because you find, a really amazing one in that group. But they're the 3 key principles. Number 1, document everything you do, so into a procedure. So anything that you do often, frequently, document into a procedure. Number 2, anything repetitive that you do over and over, automate it as much as possible. And number 3, outsource or delegate anything that isn't your core business. The other point I didn't make on that last one is, even if you're great at bookkeeping, it doesn't mean that you should automatically do the books for your business, because you need to think about the opportunity cost of that time. So remember, the goal here is to scale our time, is to scale our limited resources. So even if you can do something, it doesn't mean you should do it. What you want to stick to doing are the things that are core to your business, the thing that your business actually stands for. So aim to just focus on that. Does that all make sense so far? Yep, it's all pretty logical. We all know this stuff. It's very easy to dismiss it. And as we all know, like anything, it's the actual doing. So we need to actually prioritize this. So one thing you could do initially is just schedule some time once a week to actually go through creating procedures. The other way of thinking about it is, every time you sit down and do something, have a little post-it reminder on your desk to create a procedure out of it, or to ask yourself the question, who could I get to do this for me? The other thing, back on the second one around automation, there are actually people who, like if you've got an IT professional to come and help you set up automation, they'd be aware of all different systems and tools, and they could link in Zapier and do it, set it all up for you. So even if you don't have the capability to do those things, you can get people to do them for you. So now we're going to look at different systems, and I've broken them down into a few categories. What we're going to start with is systems for focus. And the reason I'm starting with this one, and what I mean by this, is, as we all know, in the early days of a new business, we have a lot of shiny object syndrome happening, where we get distracted by new things. And it's not actually such a bad thing, because when we're in the discovery phase, when we're doing our customer validation to find the problem solution fit, and then into the product market fit, in those phases, we have to say yes to everything, because we say yes to everything so that we can find out and learn what to say no to. And the problem with that is, then at some point we actually need to get focus. So in this section, I'm going to refer to systems and processes to achieve focus. It's also really important, because without focus, and when we onboard new team members, they don't know what to do. They're lost. If 1 minute we're doing X and the next minute we're doing Y, our team members, our suppliers, our customers can get really confused. So systems for focus. So I'm going to start with something from a workshop we did 2 or 3 sessions ago, where we talked about 10xing your business. And this is where you document who you are. So what I mean by that is, have a written vision statement. And if you recall, if you haven't seen the workshop where we went through the vision and mission it was around 10xing your business, go back to that workshop. And in there, I gave examples of different companies and their vision and mission statements. But the vision is the vision of the world that you want to create. What's the vision of the world? And then the mission is how you're going to achieve that. So make sure you have your vision statement. Make sure you have your mission statement. And then the other one we have here is your cultural statement. And this is the culture that you want to instill in your organization. And the reason this is important is because your culture defines the rules of behavior of your team when no one is watching them. So your culture becomes how your team will behave when you're not there. And then finally is your pitch. So it's really important to have your pitch clearly defined. And the reason for this is, for yourself, for your customers, for suppliers, for investors, but also when you bring on the team, it's amazing how quickly people can pitch what you're doing in a different way, and it gets really muddled. So to achieve focus, we need these things written down. And I know it doesn't seem like a system, but it actually is. Because when you have these things written down, then it makes sure that, imagine the analogy of everyone in a boat, and they're now rowing in the same direction. Because there's no point having procedures or other systems if we're not all going and moving in the same direction. So that's why these ones are critically important to start with. Then the next part of that is a strategy and plan. And for those of you who've heard me in other sessions, you'd know, when you're first starting out, I don't believe in creating a plan. But as you're moving into this phase where you're looking at efficiencies and scale, you start to need to document a strategy and plan. Now, the key parts of this I recommend at this point is writing down who your customer is. So what is your customer profile or your customer archetype? And I'm a huge advocate of actually writing down who your customer is not. The reason for that is otherwise we can start just saying yes to everyone, even if they're not the perfect customer for us. And what that can mean is we end up having to create all different types of features, all different types of services to cater for different people and different customer types.
Hey, Aaron, before we move on, can you define customer archetype?
Sorry, did you say, can I explain customer archetype?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sure. So imagine for you, Brent, with your business. So you're targeting a particular type of business that wants an early prototype built or a web presence built. Now, you could just say, oh, we're for anyone that wants a website. But the reality is there's some clients that are going to be much better for you than others. They're going to be much less work. They're going to be in your sweet spot of whatever you're focused on, like e-commerce, for example, or rapid prototyping. They're going to have a certain capacity to pay your rates. So what you want to do is define your archetype as strictly as possible, where it's like, my target customer archetype is a small business that turns over between $1 and $5 million a year, has between 5 and 25 staff, and is in these industries or verticals. So that would be an example of a customer archetype. Similar if you were, trying to think of some other examples, more consumer facing. Imagine you've got a new type of property real estate platform, and you might be targeted specifically at first-time homeowners. So you're not looking at investment property owners, you're just looking purely at first-time homeowners, and there's probably a certain demographic that you're targeting there as well. So that's what we mean by, customer profile archetype. The other bit of that I was saying was it's really good to write down who your customer isn't. So over time, you'll learn that there's just some shitty type of customers. There's some customers that are just way more work than they should be. They never pay their bills on time, or maybe they're too big. Maybe they're like a BHP and they expect a level of quality and a level of access that you just can't deliver. So whichever way it is, writing down who your customer isn't is also really important. It stops you. And then the other thing is you need to have the discipline to actually stick to that. The other parts of this one, though, documenting your strategy and plan, is being really clear on what you do and what you won't do. So these are like your rules for, as a business, we won't discount for this, or we won't do these types of events, or we won't do these types of services, or whatever it is. So at this point, what we're talking about is just documenting. So if we go back to where we're at, these are all systems and processes for focus. The reason it's important is because it scales your time. Focus enables you to scale your time to have the biggest impact, put your time where it's most important, has the biggest value to the business. But it also helps give clarity to your customers about what you do, where you're going, gives clarity to your partners, as in vendors, suppliers, gives clarity to investors, but also gives clarity to your team when your team comes in, so that everyone's rowing in the same direction. And these are the key parts of it. Just on that bit about do and not do, I'll just share a very quick story from Warren Buffett. So it turns out this story isn't actually true. I really wanted to believe it was true. But anyway, it circulated around on the internet for a long time. And it was a conversation between Warren Buffett and his pilot. So even though it's not true, it's still a really awesome example. And basically, Buffett said to his pilot, if you're still working for me in 5 years, then I've failed you. And he asked him, what do you want to, write down your 25 career goals. Like, what are 25 things you want to achieve in your life? And he wrote the list. And then Buffett went back to him and said, right, now prioritize them, like rank them. So the pilot ranked them all from 1 to 25. And then Buffett said, okay, circle the top 5, and that's what you do. Anything below that on the list, you never, ever do. Even if it lands in your lap, you do not do it. So what that means for you in business is you need to have this focus where it's like, these are the things we are doing. These 3 things, these 5 things, this is what we will do. And everything else is a hell no. I'm not going to touch it, even if it came with $10 million attached to it, which I know is really hard. And Might seem counterintuitive, but the problem is when we lose time by doing all different things, we lose momentum, we lose growth, and we actually end up with a smaller business as a result of it. So we really need to focus, and a great way to do that is the two list strategy, the do and the not do. Next, we're looking at systems to manage money. This, again, is really obvious. Nothing I'm saying today is revolutionary. You all know you need systems to manage money, but it's amazing how many businesses actually don't have systems for financial management. So what we're talking about here are systems for financial control. Now, the things that you absolutely must have, and it's okay not to have them when you're first starting, but once you've got, you found your business model and you're starting to go, you really must have these things in place, starting with a good accounting system. I recommend Xero because it's cloud-based.
Yes.
Most accountants can access it. It's very popular in Australia. The limitation of Xero is if you're doing business in the US and you need people over there to access your financial system, it's not as popular in the US yet. It's very popular in Australia and New Zealand. But definitely you need an accounting system. You need an invoicing system. Now, if you default to a payment processing system through a platform like Stripe, the challenge there is automating the invoice. So someone pays through your website. If you then have to manually generate an invoice for them to correlate to their payment, that's really cumbersome. So there's tools that you can plug in to automatically generate invoices for you. Your bookkeeping. So I do my bookkeeping myself, but I still have a bookkeeper who is on retainer that I get to check my accounts every quarter. And the only reason I do the bookkeeping myself right now is because my transactional volume, like the number of invoices I send, is quite low. When I've had a business that's like a software business or a SaaS model business, we would have an internal staff member who about 50% of their time was general bookkeeping, and we'd still have an external bookkeeper who that was just like their bread and butter. That's all they do 24/7, so they're an expert in it. You need systems for receipt management. So obviously one of the bugbears is lost receipts, reimbursing funds. One keynote here, I've said this in one of the workshops last year, but don't treat your business as a cash register. It's not your personal cash register. You can't just take money in and out of it. You can't just spend personal expenses on the company business card. You'll end up in a massive, either owing a massive loan to the company, which means tax, or you'll end up in a tax default. But more than that, it also just looks really bad as a business management practice. So if ever you get a co-founder come in, they're going to look at that and go, I don't feel comfortable here. You're taking money in and out of the business. If you get an investor to come in, they're going to have the same discomfort. So the thing to remember is when you set up a business, it's its own legal entity. So it's in the eyes of the law, it is a person. So when you put your hand in the till, you're stealing from that person. So every dollar should be paid to you either like a distribution, like a dividend payment or a salary payment. If you put a loan into the business to start with, yes, you can take that loan back out, but you should definitely get tax advice around all of that as well. Which leads to the next one, which is you need a tax accountant. So you need a really good tax accountant to manage the business. If you're doing something like a SaaS model business, so software as a service, building a high growth tech company, make sure you get an accountant who actually understands that. If you're just using the corner accountant that your mum and dad used and they're used to dealing with restaurants and you're building a high growth tech company, they're not going to understand it. They've probably never done an R&D tax credit claim before. They probably don't understand how to treat export revenue when you sell your software to someone in Kazakhstan. They probably won't know how to deal with that. They probably will really struggle if ever you do get a grant or if you get an investor. So make sure you've got an accountant who actually understands and has solid experience in doing all the things that you'll be doing in your business. So ask them who their clients are. Don't just use the family, accountant. And then the last two I've got here are reporting and review. So I'm a huge fan of doing regular checks of your accounts. So even though I mentioned before, like outsource, delegate, get professionals, you can't delegate responsibility. You are still responsible. So it's really important that you know the financial situation of the business at all times. You can't just rely on your accountant to trust everything to them. I mean, there's been so many cases of embezzlement, fraud, manipulation, but also just from my own personal experience, when I sold our biggest company, I just completely trusted my accountant, who was a good mate, and I didn't get a second opinion, and that ended up costing like an absolute fuck ton of money. Ended up owing the tax office $500,000 in tax that we weren't expecting. So you have to know this stuff. You can't just default, and that means asking questions, and it means getting regular reports. So I look at my P&L and balance sheet every couple of weeks. I just get it out of Xero myself. Previously, when I had a team, I would get them to produce the P&L and balance sheet for me each month, and so I can see how we're tracking. But it's really important that you do that regular reporting. Don't wait to the end of tax. Well, don't wait until after the end of tax year to find out where you're at. Don't wait until the last month, like June. Make sure you're looking at it regularly so that you can you've got your finger on the pulse. Oh, the other part of that is having key metrics. So, what are you measuring for growth? Don't make the mistake of just measuring revenue. Don't make the mistake of just measuring profit and loss. And I mentioned profit and loss and balance sheet. You should also get regular updates on your cash flow position. So I'm actually a huge fan of doing, once you've got the business going, actually having a cash flow forecast as your budget. So having a 12-month cash flow forecast that's got all your expenses, the actual month in which they fall due, your projected revenues, everything in your cash flow forecast. And then you constantly update it each month, update it. Because then you know your runway. So you know how much time you've got left before you run out of coin. But you also know, you can also track your growth through that as well. So far we've covered systems for focus and systems for money management. Now we're going to have systems for customers. So this is all about how do we get, keep, and grow customers. And we did a workshop previously on the sales funnel. If you missed that one, go and watch the video. That talks about measuring systems for getting, keeping, and growing customers, and how do we measure those conversions. So in this one, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail other than just to list a couple of key things, but you can go back and watch that previous webinar. So one key one is having a marketing plan, so a marketing strategy and a marketing process. So that starts with this high-level strategy. What is your marketing strategy? And that, look, in the early days, don't be put off by the word strategy. It doesn't have to be a thesis. We're not talking about a 100-page document. It could be as simple as, we know that our customers are on LinkedIn. We don't bother with Facebook. We don't bother with Clubhouse or Signal or any of the new platforms. We don't touch Snapchat because our customers aren't 18-year-old kids. So knowing where your strategy could just start really broad, and then you refine it over time. Your strategy should also include information on the type of content you're going to put out. And there's a lot on the topic of content marketing. The goal, the modern approach to marketing isn't to sell, it's to provide value. So you want to provide value, provide value, provide value. That means 8 out of 10 of your posts, of your social media posts, of your advertising posts, of your marketing posts, should be delivering value to someone. Not selling anything, just helping them. Helping them with a little bit of information or market analysis or a trend analysis or an insight, something to help them in their business if they're a business customer. Then, so that's 8 out of 10. Then you have 1 out of 10 that talks about what you're doing or a win, and then 1 out of 10, which is the sell. Now, I'm actually a huge fan of including in that showcasing your customers. So rather than standing up and saying, hey, my business is awesome, how about you stand up and say, hey, look at Tim, one of my customers. He's awesome. Look what he does. He's had this amazing result at BHP. Because by association, people will see that you're awesome. And it's like a referral system of marketing. So you have your strategy, which is big picture. What are our channels? What do we put on those channels? How frequently do we do that? How do we measure conversions? And then your plan is the actual, what's our plan? So in other words, you might have a monthly focus. You might have campaigns that you run. You might have promotional specials, but actually having that stuff planned. Now you can get all of that done. If you set aside one day where you go and take yourself into a bit of an offsite. And all I mean by that is like go and lock yourself in a different room at split spaces and put away all other devices and just focus, do some Pomodoro sprints. So you can get your marketing strategy, your content strategy, your campaigns, and your plan all lined up for the whole year in one day. Easy. It's not a hard thing to do. The second part of systems for customers is documenting our customer onboarding procedure. So when we get an order, what happens? And I know you're probably all thinking, yes, of course, Aaron, like we all know this idiot. But how many of us have like a shopping cart on our website and the email comes in and then we might not have checked it for 3 days, or we saw it and sort of got excited and then it turns out, oh shit, now I've got to do all this work. I don't really want to do it. Meanwhile, the customer's there thinking the product's already been shipped. They're getting no communications. So you need a procedure. And that procedure should include in it not just how you're building the product or whatever you're doing, but how do you communicate to the customer? So you want as much information flow to the customer as you can, like not ridiculous where it doesn't serve a purpose, but you want to make them feel loved. So again, going back to how do you wow your customer? How are you exceeding their expectations immediately, even before they're a customer? How do you exceed their expectations? How do you onboard them? How do you welcome them? How do you make them feel loved? Which sort of ties into this next slide I've got here, where I go into that a bit more detail, which is also things like what's your referral system? So when someone wants to introduce another customer, do you have a reward system? Do you have a referral program? Do you have a discount program? And you'll see one I've got listed here, which is an exit procedure. So when you lose a customer, what's your procedure there? I would say in the early days when you've got less than 100 customers, you should call anyone who leaves or doesn't place an order within X days. You should ring them up and just have a chat and see why. And through that, the reason I say that is you might find out that they're all going to a new product that's just come on the market. They're all switching to a different vendor. Maybe there's some bug in what your software that you didn't even know about and it's pissing them all off and they're leaving, and you could easily fix that in 30 seconds. But the point is, you don't know until you actually speak to them. The other thing as part of the exit procedure is, even though the product might be not right for them right now, it might be in the future. So making them feel loved might get them back in the future. But also, it might just not be a fit for them, but they could still go on and be an ambassador for you and bring in 10 or 100 more customers for you. So it's really important you do have an exit procedure for your customers as well. Again, you could probably get, in this section on customer onboarding, customer engagement, if you sat down, you could probably get most of that done in a couple of hours, like just starting to document procedures around it. Or the other approach to it is to write the procedure as you do it. So next time you do one of these things, actually create the procedure. So that could, again, it could just be in Asana. You could create a type form for it. You could start just putting it in an Excel spreadsheet to start with, so long as you're capturing it somewhere. How are we traveling so far? All good? Yep. I will share these slides afterwards as well, so you've got all the slides.
Yeah, perfect so far on my end.
Cool. So next, we're going to look at systems to actually produce your widget. So systems for product and service delivery. So obviously, look, if you were in manufacturing, typically manufacturers have lots of procedures documented anyway, because the piece of equipment gets handed down the assembly line, or there's schematics, there's engineering diagrams, there's CAD diagrams, there's circuit diagrams. But in the world of software and in the world of services, we tend not to be as good at it. We tend to just make it up as we go, or we've just got a pattern of routine. And the problem with that is there's no quality control. Things get missed. It's not easy to train new staff. Everyone adds their own little nuance. So when one customer will get, slightly different version to another, and then there's difference of experiences. Some people are then super happy. The expectations aren't met, whatever it is. So the first part of this is actually having a procedure for order fulfillment. So we talked about a procedure to onboard a customer, in other words, to get them into your systems and feel welcome. What we're talking about now is the procedure for actually fulfilling their order. So I mean, look, this could be as easy as, they sign up on the website and they've automatically got an account and now away they go. But do you then check to see that they actually logged into their account? Like, do you have 1 week later, have they actually logged in? 2 weeks later, how many times have they logged in? Are they active? Have they sent a message through the platform? Have they actually used it? I sell programs online as part of our business. And it's amazing how many people sign up, pay for it, and never, not even once, click the link to log into the program. And so having a system where it's like 14 days later, ideally it's alerted, right? Like you're sent the system, you get a developer to set it up so that you get an alert if someone hasn't logged in 14 days. And maybe it automatically sends them something. Maybe it prompts you to automatically send them a video response. But the point is, you need a procedure. You need something. And that procedure doesn't end when the customer gets their product or gets their service. You need some follow-up. So how do you engage with them afterwards? Like 1 week after delivery, why isn't it just automated in your calendar? The system automatically puts it in your calendar. Call John. He got the product 7 days ago. Check in, see how he's going. Or maybe there's an automated reminder that you create every time a customer's been on your website or a member of your software for more than 30 days. It goes in your calendar and you call them and it's like just a check-in. How are you finding product? Love your feedback. What's happening? What other problems do you have going on at work? Anything else we can solve for you? And having those discussions, you might identify 6 new features to add or a whole new product line that you could bring out. But make sure you've got a procedure to build or deliver the product or service and a procedure for follow-up. Cool. So far we've got procedures and systems for focus, procedures and systems for financial management, for customer onboarding, for delivery of our product and service. Now we're going to focus on systems and procedures for building a great team. So most people, it just sort of gets to a point where they're so time poor and shit's falling off and the kitchen's on fire. They're like, we better put an ad out. And they put something up on Seek and they get 100 replies and interview 10 and none of them are really suitable and they get disheartened, and that's one experience. Other people will outsource it to a recruitment agency. You pay the trailing commission. It feels really expensive, but you end up getting a better hire. And others just go on and never actually build a team. They get stuck in that transition phase, in that valley of death. But it is really important to decide how you will recruit people. And what you'll find is it's through experimentation of what works best for you. So I know a lot of people who hire software engineers or mechatronics or electrical engineers, and they almost all use agencies to do it because it's really hard to find good talent. So they pay the 20% trailing commission. They pay a little bit more top dollar, but they get good staff and they don't have as much hands-on time with it because they're time poor. I know people who are building machinery, like mechanical machinery, lots of mechatronics, electronics, but they actually hire farmers because young kids on farms, they know how to fix anything. So they look for farmers. So they go and actually recruit through farming groups. The point is you'll find what works for you. Some hire through student groups, internships. Some will run recruitment programs. Some it's like word of mouth. The point is you need to experiment and find what works for you. The next part of that is then you need an onboarding procedure. So rather than just hiring someone and go, there you go, I want you to do marketing, go for it. It's like you need to take the time to onboard them where they understand the business, they understand your customers, and most importantly, they understand you and how you think. So part of the onboarding procedure is you spending a lot of time with them so that they almost get your decision-making framework. What you want to instill on them, so this comes through with in the early days, you're giving too much information all the time. And part of that process is so that they understand your decision-making framework and they have that as their frame of reference so that they can think like you even when you're not there. The challenge with that is you don't want to just robots that think like you. So ideally, you want to bring people into the business who think entrepreneurially and who can come up with better ideas than you can. the challenge with that is you need to create systems and processes that allows them to have that autonomy. You need to allow them the freedom to fail. And so part of that is little things like leadership style, so investing in your leadership. So when they come to you and say, I think we should do this, and you think it's the dumbest idea ever, you need to say, look, here's what I think, but I'm going to trust you. You're the one with the at the coalface. What if we run an experiment? What would an experiment look like? And by giving them that opportunity to fail, they're training, they're learning, because they haven't been doing this like you have. They haven't been living and breathing it like you have. They don't have all the failures that you've had getting to where you are to find product market fit. So I know this is an aside to systems and procedures, but you really need to invest heavily in your leadership skills. But make sure you do have an onboarding procedure. Simple things like, how do you track hours? How do you track leave? When is payroll? Bank details, super fund details, making sure you've got insurance coverage for them, like public liability insurance. And then the other part of that is an exit procedure, which you don't need to bother writing until you get there. But how will you handle when someone leaves? What's the procedure for that? Included in that are things you need to be aware of, like IP ownership, making sure that they don't walk out the door with source code, they return any files they have access to, that all accounts are deleted, system access is removed, that you do an exit interview and really get honest feedback, all these sort of things. Team management. So we were just talking about this before, but you need systems for team workflow management. So I recommend Asana or Trello or Monday.com. You need some sort of tool that everyone manages their workflow. So the reason I share this is if you let everyone just have their own to-do list, and for some people that's a piece of paper on their desk, for some it's their calendar, for some it's their email inbox or their own Asana. The problem with that is you as the boss, as the coach of the team, you don't have visibility on what everyone's working on. So you can't pull the strings of changing priorities or correcting it when someone is working on something that isn't a priority and there's a more urgent priority. So having something like a team Asana board or a team Trello where you can see everyone's work, but most importantly, where everyone can see each other's. So high-performing teams, most teams are just an individual reporting to a boss. Like, yes, they have colleagues, but they all just go and report to the boss. Hey, boss, I'm doing this. And the boss says, go and do that. High-performing teams report to each other. So they're peer-to-peer accountability, and they help each other. They act like a tribe. So that's why you want an Asana or a Trello where everyone can see each other's work, because when someone sees someone else working on something, they're like, hang on, I'm doing that, then they can call it out straight away. There's no lag time waiting for a team meeting to happen. You do need to decide your team meetings. So when do they happen? I encourage you to make them a regular thing every, like Monday morning, 10 a.m., for example. There is an argument for Monday afternoons. Try and avoid putting meetings in mornings, because that's actually, for most people, it's their most productive time is the mornings, and a meeting just breaks it up. So maybe a Monday 2 o'clock meeting is the best time for your team meeting, start the week. You need an agenda for your meeting. The meeting should happen regardless of whether or not the boss is there. So the point of the meeting isn't to serve the boss. The point of the meeting is for the team. It's a team meeting. So there's lots of, again, these are all leadership techniques, but you should have an agenda and you should hold people accountable. So everyone should be setting what they're doing and being held accountable to achieving that. The other parts here are performance reviews and incentives. So how do you incentivize behavior? How do you reward team members? And how do you conduct performance reviews? And remember again that for those of you who've done DISC profiling or the 5 love languages, recognizing that not everyone wants to be recognized or rewarded in the same way. For some people, giving an award to someone on a stage in front of everyone is like death. They don't want to be recognized that way. For other people, being given a cash prize is what, or a gift is their primary recognition. For others, it's just private words of affirmation. But you need to know your team members and what incentivizes them. So actually asking them, what would incentivize you to 10x or to achieve this goal? What do you want? And when you think of that framing of you're the boss, you're the coach, you're not the boss. You're the coach. So you're asking your performers, your athletes on your team, how do I get the best out of you? What do you need? What do you need around you? What help? What training? What support? What tools? What systems? what incentives, what bonuses, and then doing that for them. Again, when you're starting out, the key ones here are just around a workflow management system. So just start with how are we all managing our workflow and to-do lists and having that as a team in a team format. Systems to build. Oh, so this is systems to build the business. So in here, I've just got governance. And again, it's up to you at which point you introduce these things. But as you scale, you need good governance and you need systems for good governance. So what I mean by that is you need a board. And right now, you might just be a PTY Ltd with one or two of you as directors. You should still have board meetings. So once a month, once every 2 months, once every 3 months, depending on how big your company is, how fast you're growing. Even if it's just you and your co-founder, and maybe even if your co-founder is your hubby or your wife or your sister or your brother, make sure you have a board meeting, because that's when you put on a different hat. A director has a different lens on the business to an employee or to a CEO. And that board meeting also carries with it legal liabilities and responsibilities. So if your company does something and you end up getting sued and you've never had a board meeting, the court will look very badly on that. It shows poor governance. It shows poor corporate responsibility. So have a board meeting, have an agenda for your board meeting, and keep minutes from your board meeting. This is a really good practice. It will reduce your legal liability should anything ever happen. But also, if ever you go for investment, investors love seeing founders who have good governance practices. And if you want to attract anyone onto your board in the future, like maybe you want to, I don't know, you're doing something in the ag tech space and you want to get the CEO of Kellogg's on your board, if they're coming in and joining your board and you've got no minutes, no agendas, it's all scrappy and all messy, they're gonna look at that and go, I'm not joining your board. I can't take this responsibility on. I can't take this legal risk. So have really good practices in place for your board. The other part is investor communication. So even if you don't have investors, you should be building, but you want to have investment in the future, you should be building those relationships now. So the average time that an angel knows the founders before they invest in Australia is between 6 and 18 months. So the average time to close an investment round is between 6 and 12 months for your first investment round off strangers. So you need to be building relationships early. The best way to do that is to start a little newsletter. And anytime you meet someone who could be a potential investor, just say, hey, would you mind if I keep you up to date of our progress? I'd love your advice from time to time. And your initial investor comms before you get investment is pretty much that. You're asking for advice. You're not selling anything. Best way to get investment is to ask for advice. Best way to get advice is to ask for investment. Once you have investors, though, it's really important that you put out like a monthly newsletter, keeping them up to date in the business. The worst thing you can do is only ever communicate to an investor when you want money. And it's amazing how many founders do that. I get so many founders who the only time I hear from them is when they want money. It's like, you want the investor, a good investor will deliver way more value than the dollars they put in. So use that, get them to help you and keep them up to date of your progress. The last two here I've got for procedures and documentation. One is delegations and one is duty statements. So duty statements just means like a position description. It's a bit different in the sense of duties as in, like, for example, a CEO. What are the duties of the CEO? You could include in that for your board members, like what are their terms of reference, which is just another way of saying what do the directors, what are their expectations? What are they doing? Delegations is a bit different. A delegation is where essentially the board gives you authority to do certain things, and then you as the CEO give your staff certain authority to do certain things. So for example, a financial delegation, the board might give the CEO a financial delegation to say the CEO can spend anything up to $2,000 without prior approval of the board. Anything over $2,000 has to go to the board for approval. And then you can do that with your staff. So you can have a financial delegation to your staff. Anything over $50 needs to be pre-approved. Or anything more than $200 in any 1 month needs to be pre-approved. Or maybe for you, it's every expense needs to be pre-approved for certain employees. But you need to have those delegations in place. The other delegations are like HR delegations. Who can hire someone, who can fire someone, who can sign a contract, who can sign a supplier agreement, who can sign a property lease. All these sort of things are typically decided between the board and the CEO. But by default, just because you're CEO, you don't naturally have those delegations. It's actually the board, the directors have them. And unless you have a piece of paper saying that you as CEO have that approval, then you can actually be personally liable for anything you sign or spend. So make sure you've got these sort of systems in place, this documentation in place. Again, like that's a whole separate thing we could talk about. And I actually think we do have a whole workshop coming up, maybe next month or in June, on that entire topic, because there's heaps in it. I think we've got 2 left. So 2 categories left. I know there's a lot in this. This one is systems to support the systems. So now we're getting like over the top ridiculous. But eventually what happens is you reach a point where you've grown enough that now you've got so many systems in place, you need systems and procedures to manage the systems. So in other words, the most basic way of thinking of that is like we need IT procedures. We need IT policies. We need IT management. So where are our passwords stored? Now we have so many bloody software systems for everyone and all this automation. Where are those passwords stored? What's our procedure for keeping our software up to date? What's our IT security procedure? What's our procedure when we have a data breach? When someone hacks us, what's our procedure? Do we notify customers? Do we wait until it's resolved and then notify customers? Do we have to notify a regulator like ASIC? So as you grow, and this, look, I don't think any of you are at this point yet where you need systems for the systems, but it is really useful to start putting them in place anyway. So thinking about your password management system, like who has access to the passwords, how often are passwords changed? If you have a lease, what are your procedures and policies around the use of that space? Can staff come in after hours? Who has responsibility for X, Y, Z? So again, systems are systems. I won't dwell on it too much, but it's definitely something you need to think about more as you grow. And then the last one are systems to improve your business. So this is when we go even further down the road. So imagine now you're scaling, you're out there selling your widget, you've got investors, you know how to put $1 into your business and get $10 out. It's all going amazingly well. The problem is what happens at that point is we stop innovating. We stop doing anything new. We stop making new products. We tend to just focus on iterative innovation, making our widget a little bit better, rather than entire new products or entire new services or entire new businesses. So at that point, it's really important that you introduce systems for innovation. So for example, Google gives their time, it's called 20% time. 20% of a Google's employee time they can use to come up with new ideas, solve new problems, do anything that's completely unrelated to their normal day job. 20% of their time, that's 1 day a week for innovation. Other companies have 1 day a month or 1 day a quarter where everyone on the team, they have like hack days, internal hack days. They bring in their customers for design thinking sessions. Others have experiment lists. So they have like could be a Google sheet or again, a type form, and anyone within the company or any customer can actually suggest any idea. And then those ideas go through a decision-making filter and they get experimented on. So you might say any idea that from any customer or any team member that costs less than $200 to do or less than 20 hours of human time, it's an automatic yes, we do it. And we run the experiment and see. So the point is, it actually, and I know this sounds so bizarre when you're starting out and all you're doing is constant experimentation, constantly building new shit, never feeling even like you finished the old stuff. But as you grow, you actually reach this point where you don't have time to innovate anymore. And so it is really critical that you actually come up with not just time, like I mentioned, those time systems, but how do you capture everyone's ideas? If you're so busy on just execution, what are your systems for capturing new ideas, putting them into a parking lot for later, for even just having the headspace to come up with new ideas. So again, one for down the road, but it is important to consider right at the start as well. What some companies do is they actually have a whole separate team who is responsible just for that. So I have an innovation team. Other companies have an entirely separate company. They spin out a subsidiary and have their R&D company in a totally separate company, so that it has full autonomy just to not be distracted by business as usual thinking. So that's it. there's a fair bit in there. And I know I went through it really fast rather than doing it as a workshop just because there's two of us, but did that all make sense?
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, the one thing I didn't know, I actually use Xero, and I want to actually start selling stuff online. And I thought Stripe or Square and PayPal would issue invoices. It does, or it doesn't, or it's not linked. Like, I know you can put add-ons and stuff. Can you talk more about that? Because I'm very ignorant when it comes to that.
Sure. So I can only speak somewhat intelligently about my experience with it. And I know that there's heaps of other plugins and things that can do way more. And the answer depends on exactly how you plug in all together.
Okay.
But no, so by default, Stripe won't send an invoice through like your Xero system. So we use Stripe. It goes through an education platform we use called Kajabi.
Yeah.
And then it goes from there. Obviously, the funds hit our bank account, but we haven't integrated anything into Xero. So for us, if someone does ask for a tax invoice, we actually have to go and manually generate it.
Okay. Which isn't that hard.
It's not for the volumes we're doing because we have like 20 people sign up at a time.
Yeah.
But there is a way through Kajabi that we can actually get it to send invoices. The problem still for us is it doesn't link to our Xero account. So that's our downfall. Depending what you're doing, so the beauty of Xero is it actually has a whole plugin store. So you can go through there and see what platforms you're using and see if there's a plugin that'll do it for you.
Yeah.
If you're web-based, depending what you've built, and actually Brent probably knows way more about this than I do, but if you're web-based and, say you were using WordPress, say you're using something like WooCommerce, again, there's a ton of third-party plugins that you could find something that does it for you. But yeah, it is.
Yeah, and we love using Zapier. Zapier for integrations. We can't preach how it makes it easy for a consumer to do too. So you don't need nerds like us to do the integration. Want to do the integrations.
Brent, have you got Zapier? Have you got it to do from Stripe into Xero to generate an invoice?
Actually, I've got the direct integration from Stripe into Xero, not using any. So Xero has a direct integration.
Like as in generating an invoice though, like as in like a tax invoice, or just integrated as a bank?
Ours works the other way around. So we generate an invoice and then a customer can pay through Xero.
Yes.
But yes, actually, we did have a customer who wanted to have a invoice generated. We use Zapier as a tool.
Right.
And use Stripe for payment, and then it creates an invoice. And you can also reconcile that payment too. But it gets funny because there are fees that Stripe take out too. So
same with Square. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we have, when we generate an invoice in Xero, we've integrated Stripe as a payment that's available. So the invoice goes, they can click on it and pay through Stripe. We've integrated Stripe as a bank feed so we can reconcile our Stripe account in Xero. The bit we haven't solved though is when someone goes on our education platform, which is a third-party company, pays through Stripe, that bit doesn't automatically generate an invoice in Xero, like it reconciles it.
Zapier is the tool.
Well, now that you've said that, I'm going to take a look. I reckon there might be a way.
Yeah, there definitely is. Definitely is. Let's create an invoice, make it a sent invoice. And then you can also reconcile that payment against it. And then you just need to manually account for the fees. We haven't found a way to account for the fees
yet. That's awesome. Mate, if that does that actually solves a problem for us.
I asked the right question, did I?
Yes. Yep. And this is a classic example. It's one of those things where we only get asked for an invoice from those customers maybe, I don't know, once every 2 months, and it's 10 minutes time, go and do it. So I always dismiss it rather than spend 20 minutes in Zapier, get it done, and then never have to touch it again.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, that's awesome.
All the content for today, right on par with where we're at as a business as well. Getting systems, where we've got all these manual processes, like you said, but now when we're looking to scale, we're looking for efficiencies. The team are overworked, and I think that there are definitely ways to automate what we do as well. I was hoping you had the secret keys to all of those automations, but definitely inspired some ideas.
Yeah, I was thinking about you with a couple of those because having a team, it becomes more relevant than ever, right? Like you've got the quality control aspect, you've got the team performance management aspect, you've got the time utilization aspect, you've got the client communication aspect. So I think, I was thinking about you in terms of this is probably a sweet spot for you right now.
The checklist thing, that's something, if we can solve that. So we do a QA process, and it's quite manual at the moment, and we are wanting to go to a checklist, but what do? Do we get an assigner board that's a checklist so we can click it off and keep track of it? Do we use Google Docs?
Yeah.
To work out what tool?
It's a good question. So it's a really good question. So one thing is you could build something proprietary, right? Like that manages your entire customer journey and has procedures under it. And then you could actually have auditing and all that. It's probably an overkill though. The other thing is, I quite like Typeform for anything where you need an audit of it, like because it gets logged at the time of entry. People can't go back and change it. I mean, obviously they could submit a new one, but that someone's completed those steps and they've sort of signed off on it. And then you could have Zapier trigger things off that as well, which I quite like notifications or handover to someone else on the team.
I do love the idea of building something proprietary for ourselves because that's what we do. We build systems.
Yeah.
But then, I'm also inspired by Streamtime. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
No.
They built a system for themselves. They're an agency, and then they sold it out to other people, and they've got so that's a revenue stream for them. And then I was reading just recently. I think Flow. If familiar with their story.
No, not their story. No.
They built out a big system. They competed with Asana for a while. They ended up going bankrupt because they didn't get outside investment into the business at the right time. But they've got a really interesting story.
Yeah, look, and I know, safety culture has one of their elements are these checklists that can integrate with other things. They had a really funny story. When they first started out, it was just like, I think it was 2 or 3 of them at the time. And they unplugged, their server was just like a computer in the corner office. They weren't even in the cloud. And they unplugged it just to move shit around. And it was like 2 a.m. and the phone started going nuts. And they're like, they didn't answer it. They thought, no, what? Who's calling at 2 a.m?
Americans?
Yeah, well, the phone just kept ringing non-stop. And they thought, fuck, we've got to answer this. They pick up the phone, and it's some guy on the tarmac who works for British Airways at Heathrow. And he's like, your software is down. I don't know if you know this, but we use your software to release all of our aircraft at Heathrow. And
holy moly, Heathrow.
Holy.
Yeah, and so they didn't even realise. They thought they just had Aussie mining companies using it and all this stuff. But that was the moment where they realised, holy shit, we're onto something. Like, this is actually a thing. But yeah, anyway, as you were saying, I don't know why I thought of that story, Brent, but I do think there is something in a proprietary system. In our software business, we built it all proprietary into our web platform, and it meant the customers had real-time visibility on everything, and we all knew, who in the team was working on what, and it was just, we found that much easier than trying to integrate something else.
Did you consider commercializing that platform?
No, because it was so integrated, we didn't. Yeah, I wonder what that would have looked like actually.
Can I just ask a question? Because you guys are experts and I'm embarrassing. I've wanted to use Calendly for years, well, maybe a year, probably a year. And I finally did it for my QS business today. And I know that there's automations. Do you use automations with Calendly yourselves?
I use Calendly, but none of the automations.
Because you can do text messages to yourself, text messages to them, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So, I was just wondering what your experience was and whether it's worth spending the time.
I think it depends what you're doing. So there's a lot you can do in there. It's awesome. Even taking payments and all sort of things. For me, I haven't had the use case to automate it. So I haven't needed to. I personally, so it's not the same, but we use Vision 6. It's like an equivalent to MailChimp.
Yep.
Or our SMS gateway. And one of the reasons we use it, it's got an API, so we can code a lot of stuff to it. But also, like the Zapier integration, we can create little zaps to automatically send someone an SMS when they sign up for our program and that sort of stuff. So I've used that for that use case. I only use Calendly really to integrate with Zoom and my calendar for things like this where I'm engaged as an EIR and I need to block out office hours. Otherwise, I don't really use it that much, to be honest.
Okay. What about you, Brent? Do you use Calendly or have your clients used Calendly and stuff?
I do. Part of our onboarding is to do like an onboarding session, which is just so much easier to send our clients a link to find a joint time. But yeah, as to the rest of the integrations, no, I haven't. On the other end, though, I do like the SMSs. I know that it's helpful when I get a message a couple of hours before a meeting. So I don't mind it from a consumer perspective.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I find it helpful too to be reminded. Yeah. Because it would be annoying if you were turning up for a call and they forgot and you got no shows. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Which does happen quite a lot.
Yeah.
Those reminders.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions or anything to go through?
No.
Nothing that I